which is Anna Angelic in conversation with Kati Chitrakorn. So you obviously will know Anna as the brand strategist to know, the amazingly influential Substacker, and of course the author of her new book, Hitmakers, How Brands Influence Culture. Kati Chitrakorn is an editor at CNN and also a fantastic editor who we're absolutely delighted to be joining us today in conversation with Anna. Another warning that we have the fire alarm in 5 minutes. But for now, I'll hand over to Anna and Kati.
Thanks, Alex, for the introduction, and thank you, everyone, for the warm welcome. I am so excited to hear from Anna. As Alex mentioned, I'm currently at CNN, but in my previous roles, I wrote a lot about retail and marketing. Those were kind of my key beats as a reporter, and I would often be calling up Anna, trying to get her thoughts, and we'd often be like riffing on ideas together. And she is now celebrating her second book, so congratulations, which is aptly also the title of this session. So tell us, what was the catalyst for the book? Was it an idea that had been kind of percolating in your mind for some time, or were there more notable shifts that just made it more pertinent to write about now?
I love that question because my first book was The Business of Aspiration, which I sort of wrote when, after a decade of working first with agencies and then at brands, that was revolving around modern luxury and how luxury is changing, how are people spending their time, how they're spending their money. And that was what is the new aspiration, what is driving them to, how are they showing the status. So that was the first. The second one was based on my work at Esprit and at Banana Republic, and I sort of felt that brand marketing and marketing overall and brand strategy and creativity and the way that brands exist in the world has changed so much, and that's what I saw on the ground coming into these legacy organizations and being tasked in reviving them very quickly. It was sort of, I thought it was needed to put together not just an approach, but also a framework and a template and a new strategy that defines brand marketing as the strategy of cultural influence. So that is where the book came from, is from what we have done actually in practice, from the professional experience in those two organizations, obviously packaged together in digestible and applicable sections. So anyway, that was the sort of like storytelling, cultural products, media amplification, and how to put everything together.
In your book specifically, you talk, it's really about cultural hits and how to use those moments to create a market hit. Like, what does that mean?
So when you think about it, like which brands and which times capitalize cultural conversation, and there is not anymore one moment, one time, one thing. Everything is happening on parallel tracks. So I sort of never understood the thing, move at the speed of culture. I mean, obviously I understand it, but in a sense, it's kind of like, but what are you actually chasing when you do that? There is not one thing that you want to say, hey, we are doing it as X, Y, Z. There's so many things that are happening at the same time. And as you see, even just in the past year, Brad Summer, an example. So that was a marketing campaign that was very smartly made in order to create cultural hits, which means people talking about it, sharing it, in order to promote a market hit, like an album that is making money. So when you think about also like maybe Adidas Sambas, for example, that is a cultural hit that gains market share. But if you go back to Brett, for example, how it was engineered, it was like Charlie was literally in Bushwick, New York, which was in the past few years the ground zero of all the memes, the conversations, the clubs, and that club rat, that rat girl, she was having pop-ups there, knowing that that is going to be amplified across the globe. So basically, that is a great template of an example of cultural influence strategy. But it can also be done something smaller, what we did at Banana in 2021. So, okay, rewind 4 years, when we really understood that if we are going to get with Gen Z, if we are going to get with younger audience, it's really the vintage that is going to get them in, because they're like, Banana is like old person's brand. So you need to understand what the zeitgeist is, what the dominant mood, more than people never make their decisions in isolation. They always influenced by what they see, what is the mood. If the mood is right for something, anything can explode. If it's not, no one can start a trend. So in a sense, it's tapping into what you see is happening as a trend that can generate your results. So basically creating a vintage shop, sourcing those vintage items, putting them on Fifth Avenue, putting them prominently, and then saying, hey guys, we are back, even if our current collection sucks. This is really something cool for you there anyway. You know, now obviously everyone is doing it, it's not so new or groundbreaking, but a lot of, like, I had the CEO of Gap calling me, how did you guys do it, you know? So that's just kind of putting in context how even big stodgy brands can do something that's culturally relevant to get there, where they need to be. And we did at the end. It was like 24% year-on-year organic sales revenue increase.
Like, as you said, we're influenced by everything around us, and you kind of wrote in your book how brands have, brands previously influenced culture mostly through their advertising, and really the key places of influence were mass media like TV, print, billboards. But as we've discussed, like, media habits have been changing. While those were one of the first places where you would see or capture history, a lot of that is now taking place on social media and online. How does that impact brands when it comes to storytelling or, you know, engineering that cultural hit or moment?
It's once brands moved from, they used to influence culture through mass media, print, PR, and so on. And those were those big moments when you think about 80s Air Jordans, or even Pepsi, Britney Spears, and Beyonce. And even like maybe until 10 years ago, that was like even Super Bowl was a big thing. The last thing that was a big thing was Olympics, but it was not even consumed or it was not watched on a network TV. It was watched through memes, through snippets of content that people shared. So that was how the scale was achieved. So the idea in the book, and just in general, is basically how to move brands from communicating through mass media towards communicating through creating a lot of cultural products. So cultural products are merch, collaborations, archive reissues, retail experiences, events, content is a big part of it, editorial, but also fandom and community. So if you have, like, at any point, a brand has the entire playbook on their disposal. That's why that story is the important part, which is not your brand manifesto or your positioning, but it's basic the story. What is that common thread? What is your narrative to participate in culture? So, for example, Starbucks has insane following on social media. It's like, bring Starbucks back in Barnes & Noble. We want the dim lights. We want those like maps on the tables. We want the board games. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, why don't you create a chess club in a Starbucks? Is that, how do you classify that? That is marketing, that's retail marketing, but it's also retail experience, that's also brand experience. So it's not necessarily that marketing, advertising, communication, but is something that gathers community at the same time as frames the brand experience in a specific way.
And also in your book, in terms of building those communities, you talk about tapping into the creative class, media amplification, which that's how you identify it. Can you talk more about that, how to do it, why it's so important?
Yeah, because without media amplification, cultural products remain a niche. Because yes, imagine if Starbucks did that, they have that like chess club and so it's known locally. But then, if they actually put some money, this is all imaginary example, if they put some money against that and say, hey, we are going to create a long-form content as a Starbucks production, we're going to create a movie, like make a movie about female chess players around the world or something, that's one application. Or you can create out of home just with a chess board against Jürgen Teller shot with a white background with a coffee cup, and don't say anything else. So that will amplify whatever is happening on the local level. So the whole idea is first detecting what are the kind of fertile contexts to be seeding something, and then second is to amplify it through media. And I'll give you an example. When we were working on Esprit in the second year before it went under, we did Night at the Museum as a campaign that was for last spring. So we were in Miami Art Basel, and at Art Basel we presented this at Scope, and we partnered with this ruby hibiscus drink that did Esprit graphic design treatment in such a way that people literally thought that the fridge for their drinks was a work of art. And then we had those like little Greek statues in like stark colors, and people were like, how much is that? How much is that? Can we take a photo? And someone knocked it off, and then like, oh, now it's like 40,000, you know? So it's, you know, and then we had like images from the campaign there. So it's kind of the whole idea, seriously. And now the whole idea was kind of to like one thing to amplify the other. And then you use that footage for your own social media. And then you use that footage to introduce the character of a Greek statue named Herbert or whatnot that appears later in your campaign. So it's all about that interstitial storytelling when one thing is connected with everything else and one thing leads to another. So in absence of having a dominant mood that benefits your brand, you create, you prepare basically that mood. You start introducing ideas and themes that then get amplified and then grow. So you kind of like, oh, that's Esprit doing Night at the Museum. They're connected with that team, and it becomes known among your audience and wider.
Well, I think it's quite interesting. It kind of links back to what Chris was saying in the previous panel about getting people around you to kind of talk on your behalf as well as a brand for them to get involved.
Well, that's great in theory, but how do you do that, right? I mean, like getting people to talk, they need to have something to talk about, and it needs to be about them. It can never be about you as a brand, so that means like you never know what's going to strike people, in a sense. So that's why that is that cultural products approach, which is basically a portfolio approach. You do a lot of different things, and some people are going to talk about chess at Starbucks. Some people are going to talk about 90s. Others are going to talk about vintage. Third people are going to talk about demure. You don't know. That's why you need to kind of release and see which ones are gaining traction and then amplify that. So obviously, I think we have OK Cool here who are doing that well in a sense when you have like when something happens, if you react really quickly, then you tap into already existing conversation. Like I love what you did with Away and Calvin Klein briefs, for example, but that was a perfect moment that everyone was already talking about. So obviously they're going to react well to that because they're already talking about. But I just think that getting people to talk about on your behalf is something that doesn't happen just because you want it. You have to constantly do a lot of things and release a lot of merch, do a lot of collaborations, release a lot of content, have experiences and events. And then, if you do everything so well, then people are going to talk about it.
So kind of given that, like as you just said, like the kind of Calvin Klein ad was like very impactful. If you haven't seen it, it's very spicy. I recommend you looking it up. But the timing is great. It was, had Jeremy Allen White. It was released like just mere days before his Golden Globes win, and it was at the beginning of the awards season. Like, do you think that campaign would have been as successful without all of his wins?
Well, no, and we don't know, obviously, but like retroactively, when you look at what was the right mood, and the right mood was like Jeremy Allen White has been an underdog. The show he was nominated for is an underdog. The role he's playing is an underdog. So that was like you root for an underdog to win. Second thing is, a giant, Calvin Klein has this on Houston, this giant billboard that's theirs, and they just like replace campaigns. So all of a sudden there was like a naked Jeremy Allen White, like super ripped, you know, and then people, like girls start taking photos of that and hashtagging, and that starts going. And that's a few days before the video was released on social. It was released as a TV spot. It wouldn't have been so successful, but like it's so easily shareable and people are talking about it, and oh my God, what a great ad, and oh my God, he looks amazing, and then he wins. And then he wins again and again and again. So it's kind of, there is nothing bigger than mass media. So that was a gigantic amplification. The problem was that Calvin Klein never did anything with it. Like after that was done, it was done. Like you guys did more than they did. They like, on a dumbest possible level, they could have taken a photo from that campaign and put it on a Calvin Klein t-shirt and sold it as a drop or a merch or so on, not to mention further collaborations and whatnot. The point is, a month ago or something, there was another campaign with Jeremy Allen White. He's like, I don't know, walking around the room and like sitting on a couch, and no one cared. No one. Okay, he had more clothes on, number one, but at the same, but like, you know, it was that the mood was not there at all.
So what could the future of cultural products look like moving forward? Like how do you see that developing? Because when I ask you that, I think about 2024, and that was such a big year for example, fashion and films. You really saw a lot of kind of activity around brands and movies, you know, like with Wicked, with Barbie. What's your advice for like building, creating cultural products going forward?
Well, I think that's like Barbie was that Barbieheimer. That was that summer, and again, that was one of those things when was a perfect storm that sort of came together, and it was amplified through those memes of both of those super different movies. But like, make no mistake, there was a lot of money spent. That was a marketing campaign with a movie attached, basically. So that was, I think, 23. Last year, what we have with Weekend is not a good movie. It's like, it's not getting, like, of course, if you have to do a promo tour, you're going to be everywhere and so on. And you say method dressing, that's also super relevant, but it all goes back to that world building. So that means you stay in character. Remember how Austin Butler stayed in his like Elvis character for like 3 years after the, or what, you know? But like that is sort of an example how that role playing, like who, like it's not enough to be on the red carpet and be dressed up and so on. No, you need to play a role. And then if you play a role, like thank God that Cynthia Erivo is not like green, although she, you know, like God bless, like why not? But like it's the same thing. It's kind of like what is that world that you're building around? Because the more convincingly you build the world around entertainment product, like A24 production company and distribution, they do that really well. They always have a line of merch, they have events. Even for Euphoria, they have a line of like makeup that is done by makeup artists who was inspired by Bushwick, Gen Z girls, and then she applied that. So it's kind of how do you close that entire loop? How to create a very convincing world where no detail is too small. So that is basically what we are going to see more and more of.
And look, I guess finally, as we head into 2025, like what are some of the key things you're looking out for that you're most excited by?
I'm very excited because what I'm seeing in retail, in fashion retail, luxury retail, is like this giant deconstruction that is happening with the industry when you have business models that being stretched to their limits. And that's like that efficiency, and we've seen such a dearth of creativity because of that pressure for productivity really leads to unremarkable results. That's why we have so many revivals, so many copies, so many things that feel so familiar and uninspiring. It's okay to feel familiar, but as you say, like there is a saying, if you want to make something surprising, make it familiar. If you want something familiar, make it surprising. And so that's what I think is going to break down. And I've seen also a change of guard, literally, how you have older guard in brands with very old school people. Sort of that is fading away. Maybe not next year, but that change of guard is happening when you have smaller companies doing amazing things. Look at what On Running has done based on product innovation, but not following any playbook. So we're going to see more and more those alternative business models that are not necessarily copy-paste, have a product, you hire a celebrity, build a brand, this brand disappears, and so on. And at the same time, at the legacy brands that when they have like the gigantic structures that are super siloed, that are just cannot withstand the pace. And responsiveness, less than pace, more responsiveness. You really need to have that back-end creativity when someone from supply and production can literally be like, oh, we know how to do this. We know how to label those vintage shop items that were sourced from eBay and make it part of our warehouse. And we need to know which SKUs to give them. Like, it comes down to that. And companies are not still good at that. So I think that is the big restructuring that's happening. And that's accelerating, I think.
All right, well, thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you.